Stanley, Chapter 4, The Museum Thieves. Mr. and Mrs. O.J. Dart lived in the apartment above the ram shop. Mr. Dart was an important man, the director of the famous Museum of Art downtown in the city. Stanley Lambchop had noticed in the elevator that Mr. Dart, who was ordinarily a cheerful man, had become quite gloomy. But he had no idea what the reason was. And then breakfast on one morning, he heard Mr. and Mrs. Ramchop talking about the Mr. Dart. "I see," said Mr. Ramchop, reading a paper over his coffee cup. "That still another painting has been stolen from the famous museum. You say here that Mr. O.J. Dart, the director, is at his wits' ends." "Oh dear, are the police no help?" Mr. Lambchop asked. Mrs. Lambchop asked. "It seems not," said Mr. Lambchop. "Listen to what the chief of police told the newspaper. We suspect a gang of the sneak thieves. They are the worst kind. They work by sneakery, which makes them very difficult to catch. However, my man and I will keep trying. Meanwhile, I hope the people will buy tickets for the policeman's ball and not park their car where signs say don't." The next morning, Stanley Lambchop heard Mr. Dart talking to his wife in the elevator. "These sneak thieves work at night," Mr. Dart said. "It's very hard for our guards to stay awake when they have been on duty all day. At the famous museum is so big, we can't guard every picture at the same time. I feel it is hopeless. Suddenly, as if an electric light bulb had lit up in the air above his head, giving out a little shooting line of excitement. Stanley Lambchop had an idea. He told it to Mr. Dart. "Stanley," Mr. Dart said, "if your mother will give her permission, I will put your plan to work this very night." Mrs. Lambchop gave her permission, "But you will have to take a long nap this afternoon," she said. "I won't have you up till all hour unless you do." That evening, after a long nap, Stanley went with Mr. Dart to the famous museum. Mr. Dart took him into the main hall, where the biggest and the most important paintings were hung. He pointed to a huge painting that showed the birdman wearing a fluffy velvet hat, playing a violin for a lady who lay on couch. There was a half-man, half-horse person standing behind them, and 3 fat children with wings were flying around above. Then Mr. Dart explained it was the most expensive painting in the world. There was an empty picture frame on the opposite wall. We shall hear more about that later on. Mr. Dart took Stanley into his office and said, "It is time for you to put on a disguise." "I already thought of that," Stanley Lambchop said, "and I brought on my cowboy suit. It has red bandana. Then I can tie over my face. Nobody will recognize me in a million years." "No," Mr. Dart said. You will have to wear the disguise I have chosen." From closet he took a white dress with a blue shawl and a pair of shiny little pointed shoes, and a white straw hat with a blue band that matched the shawl, and the wick and the stick. The wick was made of blonde hair, long and done in ringlets. The stick was curved at the top, and it, too bad, too had a blue ribbon on it. In this shepherdess disguise, Mr. Dart said, "You will look like a painting that belonged in the main hall." "We do not have cowboy picture in the main hall." Stanley was so disgusted. He couldn't hardly speak. "I will look like a girl. That's what I will look like." She said, "I wish I had never had my idea." But he was good sport, so he put on the disguise. Back in the main hall, Mr. Dart helped Stanley climb up into the empty picture's frame. Stanley was able to stay in the place because Mr. Dart has cleverly put four small spikes in the wall, one for each hand and foot. The frame was a perfect fit against the wall. Stanley looked just like a picture, except for one thing. Mr. Dart said Japanese are supposed to look happy. They smile at their ship and at the sky. You look fierce, not happy, Stanley. Stanley tried too hard to get a faraway look in the eye and even to smile a little bit. Mr. Dart stood back a few feet and stared at home for a moment. "Well," he said, "it may not be art, but I know what I like." We went off to make sure that certain other parts of Stanley's plan were taken care of. Stanley was left alone. It was very dark in the main hall. A little bit of moonlight came through the window, and Stanley could just make out the word "most expensive" painting on the opposite wall. He felt as though the bearded man with the violin and the lady on the couch and the half-horse person and the winged children were all waiting as he was for something to happen. Time passed and they got tired and tired. Anyone would be tired this later at night, especially if he had to stand in a picture frame balancing on the little spike. Maybe they wouldn't come, Stanley thought. Maybe the sneaker thief wouldn't come at all. The moon went behind the cloud and then main hall was pitch dark. It seems to get quieter, too, with the darkness. There was absolutely no sound at all. Stanley felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle beneath the golden curve of the wick. The creaking sound came from the right out the middle of the manhole, and even he heard that Stanley saw, in the same place, the tiny yellow glows of light. The creaking came again, and the glow got bigger. A trap door has opened in the floor, and two men came up into the hall. Stanley understood everything at once. This must be sneak thieves. They had a secret trapdoor entrance into the museum from the outside. That was why they had never been catched. And now tonight they were back to steal the most expensive painting in the world. He held very still in his picture frame and listened to the sneak thief. "This is Max," said first one. This is where we are rubber pro a sensational job. Witness the civilized community sleeps. Right, Luther, and the other one. In all this great city, there is no one to suspect us. Ha ha, thought Stanley Lambchop. That's what you think. The sneak thief put down their lantern and took the world's most expensive painting off the wall. What do you do? We do. Anyone who tried to capture us, Max, the first man asked. We would kill men. What else? His friends replied. There was enough to frighten Stanley, and he was even more frightened when the Luz came over and stared at him. This sheep girl, Luz said. I thought sheep girl was supposed to smile, Max. This one looks scared. Just in time, Stanley managed to get a faraway look in his eye again and to smile sort of. You're crazy, Luz, Max said. She's smiling, and what a pretty little thing she is, too. That made Stanley furious. He waited until the sneak thief had turned back to the world's most expensive painting, and he shouted in his loudest, most terrifying voice, Police! Police! Mr. Dart, this sneak thief are here! The sneak thieves looked at each other. Max said the first one, very quietly, I think I heard a sheep girl yell. I think I did it too, said Max in the quavery voice. Oh boy, yelling the picture, we both need a rest. You will get a rest, all right, shouted Mr. Dart, rushing in with the chief of the police and a lot of guards and policemen behind him. You will get a rest. That's what, ha ha ha. The sneak thieves were too mixed up by Mr. Dart's joke and too frightened by the policemen to put up the fight. Before they knew it, they had been handcuffed and led away to jail. The next morning in the office of the chief of police, Stanley Lambchop, got a medal. The day after that, his picture was in all the newspaper.